Okay, if the blood's not flowing this morning, hopefully that helps you a little bit. All right, as our final event, we have a panel of experts to speak to artificial intelligence and machine learning. The panel will be introduced by Mr. David Spirk. Dave is USSOCOM's first Chief Data Officer. So Dave returned to U.S. Special Operations Command in August of 2018 as its first generation Chief Data Officer. In his role, he is responsible to the commander for the creation of a data-driven decision-making culture while leading the integration of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and automation across the U.S. Special Operations Forces enterprise. Prior to becoming a civilian, Dave served across echelons at various United States Marine Corps elements that set the stage for many deployments throughout Africa, the Balkans, and South Asia. He was the first Marine Corps intelligence specialist in Afghanistan after the attacks on September 11th. And as a member of Task Force 58, he participated in the seizure of Kandahar Airfield and the reopening of the American Embassy in Kabul. So it's my distinct honor and privilege to introduce to you Mr. David Spirk.
Good morning. It's an honor to be here. I'm usually the guy that's in the back of the room and maybe a little more comfortable pushing from there, sir, so I'll try and get through this quick, and we'll get the panelists up who I think everybody probably wants to hear from. I was at General Clark's opening remarks, Jim Smith's, and then Mr. West yesterday, and it's not lost on me that this is going to be pretty tough to follow them. But we'll do our best, and hopefully the topic itself will speak for where we're going. So I'll open up with a slide that really kind of puts where the SOF enterprise writ large is trying to go. What we have here is a slide that kind of emerged from a conversation we had in one of our panelists' workspaces with the former SAF Administrative Assistant, Secretary of the Air Force's Administrative Assistant, Pat Z. Pat spent most of her career in the budget side of the world, and as she started describing the challenge that she had in having enough data and enough capability to actually make those decisions, what we did was we kind of whiteboarded out a chart. And on the top of that chart, it was comfort. On the bottom is discomfort. On the left is data-free decisions, and on the right is decision-grade data. And as we started to look at where we are in the SOF enterprise and how that really applies, we have energetic and stupid, that's up in the top left. We have kind of sad clown, which is down in that bottom left, you know, people that know there's something different, but we need to get technology and the data to them to allow them to do it. The bottom right side is people who are using the technology but are uncomfortable with it because they don't understand how it works. And that's just an education piece, and we'll get to workforce in a little bit. And then the top right, those people are feeling good. They have embraced the data-driven machine. They are making decisions faster and more accurately than anybody else in the formation. AI and ML live in that space, and we're going to describe how we're going to get there as a SOF enterprise. So we didn't just make this up. I didn't just make this up. What we've done is we've gone out and seen what is working in industry. We have looked at those plans. We listened to Andrew Ng. We read his playbook for AI transformation, and we've gone ahead and modeled ourselves off of that pilot project and then the lessons that we've learned in application through the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, Lieutenant General Shanahan, and Drew Kukor and the team at Project Maven, who we work extensively with, and we'll show you some of the projects we're working with them. As we build that AI team and we develop our AI strategy out of that, we understand that it's all about the data. So we went ahead and we looked at the principles that Jeff Bezos used for Amazon as far back as 2002. And when he pushed those out to his organization, he transformed how Amazon was and where it went. And so taking those data principles and recognizing that it's really about freeing your data, it's about open APIs, it's not about closed block technology or systems, we've modeled our soft data strategy out of that. And then the last bit is honestly reading War on the Rocks. The University of Texas has some great thought pieces that are coming out of that. They published an article on what that data and digital value chain really is, both in industry and in the Department of Defense as we begin deploying it. And as we started looking for those things, we started to set up those pieces that we hope to measure ourselves against in the out years to show whether we as a team are collectively making progress for that sustainable future. For the first time, as we transition from industry and academia, we've also seen some guiding documents come out from our government and from the Department of Defense. Started out with the AI executive order that was released in January. This is the first of its kind. We've never had that type of an umbrella document that really was a clarion call for not only the Department of Defense, but the entire United States government. And it allowed us to understand how to nest ourselves and look up and make sure that we're comporting to what that future is. Out of that, on the heels of it very quickly, Lieutenant General Shanahan released the DoD AI strategic approach. This came out of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center's AI strategy. And in that AI strategy, we were able to develop what we call the SOF AI principles. Working with Brendan McCord, who at the time was the Deputy Director of the JAIC, recognizing projects we were working with them, what we did was we kind of set those SOF AI principles, and we really wanted to focus on growing the discipline. Growing the discipline applies to people, it applies to technology, and it applies to the culture, and those changes in the formation to get there. Purpose-driven application, this is at the heart of what we do. We are going to begin deploying the technologies, and I'll talk a little bit more about where we're deploying it now, where we intend to deploy it, and how it mashes up with the commander's priorities in a following slide. But purpose-driven application is at the heart of what we do, because as we begin applying the technology, we begin learning the lessons that this groundbreaking technology that Eric Schmidt has equated to the arrival of nuclear energy in the Department of Defense formation. We don't even know what we don't know. We don't know the enterprise enablers that we're going to need. By plugging the technology in, we'll understand that, and we can start to deliver that for decentralized execution. Lastly, it's make it the norm. I've heard several people talk about the arrival of email in the Marine Corps formation, and recognizing that before we had email, we did workflows an entirely different way. We believe that if we do this right as a department, and if SOF can help fan the flames and be a leader, that we can begin to encourage workflow change that 5, 10, 20 years from now, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and decision-grade data is just the norm, and we won't even remember what came before email. We'll just start executing. So how did we develop the strategy, and what's really at the crux of this? The crux of this is what we call the SOF 365 AI strategy. That SOF 365 AI strategy really focuses initially on the 3 lines of effort that I think if you look back to the AI transformation that Andrew Ng talked about, really focuses on that AI-ready workforce, building your own AI team, AI application, plugging the technology in, and then AI outreach. How we engage academia, how we engage industry, and frankly, how we engage our own department and the interagency that's going to allow us to grow the discipline for the first 12 months of our efforts. As we begin to transition to that purpose-driven application, and we believe we're starting to turn that corner with a couple pilot projects now maturing to the point that we're ready to showcase them. And then ultimately at the end of that 3-year time limit, we believe that we'll be able to measure our progress, because we'll be able to see some of the indicators that the outcomes we're trying to achieve are in place. We'll understand programmatically where we need to put resources, where we need to invest, where we might need to divest, and the opportunity to transition from a first-generation chief data officer, as Sergeant Major McCauley told me a time ago. You're the only guy stupid enough to come try and do this, Dave. But to who that replacement person is. Where does Dave transition in August of 21 so that we can bring in a professional that now that we've punched a product in, they can really take it to that next level. Looking at this, we went ahead and tried to look at it and how our efforts currently line up with the SOCOM commander's priorities. As we started to do this mental exercise, we really had to focus on areas that it didn't, because we believe that the way that we're growing this and the way we're emerging it match up pretty significantly and we could probably almost put 1 through 5 as an opportunity on every one of those commander priorities, our lines of effort, our focus areas, and our outcomes. But what we do know is that since we're just starting, in the September timeframe, we're gonna get all of the soft components together. We're gonna get the TSOCs together and the services, and we're gonna have what we call our first AI ML symposium. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna start the crafting of a real roadmap that then we can begin to build programmatically a portfolio that we can take to Jim Smith and his team and talk about the investments we need to make and the resources that we're gonna need in the 22 to 26 POM to get after them. The applied AI projects, this is kind of the most fun stuff. This is the stuff that we're actually doing inside those focus areas that we've received from the commander. On the left, you really see perception in action. These are projects that we've been working for some time or have been working on soft data and in the soft formation for a while. The first 3 you could almost turn to the algorithmic warfare cross-functional team that the former DepSecDef stood up, also known as Project Maven. And you can see how we're beginning to fuse those technologies, fuse those data sets to build smart systems that are capable of improving our operators' capability to execute successful operations at a rate of precision and speed that has never been accomplished before. As we begin to allow the computers to do a lot of what really are perception tasks, we can begin realigning some of those people. We can begin putting analysts on the loop, and we can begin doing more work that commonly would take a team of humans to do. Threat message, identification response, that's one that we're excited about. That's the Joint MESO WebOps Center mission that USSOCOM has received. We're beginning to partner with industry, and we're looking for opportunities that as threat messages, fake news begin to emerge, as they start to overwhelm good U.S. government, Department of Defense, and USSOCOM initiatives that are happening around the globe. We can identify those with a computer rather than a person. We can canvas all of that publicly available information and begin to advise on better responses once we get the approvals to go ahead and try and suppress those. Planning and maneuver. This was actually an ad at the request of Naval Special Warfare. We used to have a 3-5-5 AI strategy. It was a lot easier for me because I only have 5 fingers and I could remember all 5. I'm adding a 6th now. But as we started doing that, we added it because they've been doing some work with artificial reality and virtual reality that is pretty fascinating. We were able to go visit them, learn about what they were doing, and really start talking about how we can get our operators and soft professionals ready faster by leveraging AI technology inside the AR/VR world. But taking it to that next step, as we begin to put operators and professionals under headsets and we begin to afford them an opportunity to step into that space, what we've realized is there is a huge opportunity to begin collecting those operators' responses while they're under the headset. And what we can do is we can take the last 18, 19 years of combat experiences from our very best and take that, it's a little science fiction-y, but we can take that tacit thought and make it structured and explicit. So when we move to that next level, which is autonomy, we can have the best battle buddy our operators have ever had because it knows precisely how our operators are going to be acting in that environment. So the human-machine teaming upshot will be critical, and SOF will have what we believe is going to be one of the world's most valuable data sets. As we start to talk AI for planning, wargaming, mission command, this is really where we begin to fuse all of those data sets and we start talking about AI-enabled mission command instead of SIPs and COPS. The opportunity, once we start putting smart systems on all of our platforms, once we get edge computing and the requirement to feed the whole, whether it's cloud-based technologies or distant with microchips on some of our platforms, as all those data and sensors begin to flow together, what we'll recognize is the first time that we're not stovepiping data and hoping somebody has access to it, because all of the data will be able to be canvassed by the machine and eventually turn to what some might call reasoning. I know I've got Brett Goldstein, the Director of the Defense Digital Service over here, and he's already telling me reasoning isn't a computer term. And so we're going to encourage him to speak in human terms when he comes on stage. I know, thank you. Communication, intelligence, cyber protection, we've got General Fogarty who's gonna come up. I'm not gonna hit that too much right now. We'll let him talk to us about what ARCYBER is doing and how they're leveraging automation and AI, but we are definitely partnering with them throughout our formation to make sure that we are taking advantage of technologies. Recruiting, training, and talent management, this is where we break out of what some people might call the traditional intel and operator role, and we begin looking at how we can identify a candidate for any of our components who would be a good SOF operator. How can we look at, once we've assessed them, where they're going to have trouble in our training programs, and how do we tailor our training so that we can maximize their effort and grow them at a faster rate and hold them in the force. And then individual measure and performance. This is where we can turn to technologies that already exist in the sports world, that already exist in some of our medical professions, and we can start measuring our SOF operators, and we can start optimizing their performance on the X and back CONUS home, where we're looking at the hyper-enabled operator concept and some of the other capabilities that aren't necessarily strapping technology onto them, but it's measuring them and allowing them to better understand when they need a glass of water. Predictive maintenance and logistics, this is an exciting one that we've probably made the most progress in. Working with USSOCOM, we were able to be the flagship predictive maintenance, I want to say show pony, but that's a little bit too gamey. We were out of the gate, and we were able to take our 160th Night Stalkers, and we were able to begin attempting to predict engine glass over. As we were working the engine glass over, an important component of actually applying the technology, the data work to the left side of that actually proved itself more valuable because we were able to begin drawing conclusions from the data that until we started seeing it in real time, we weren't able to see. We're trying to expand that to the CV-22 fleet down at AFSOC right now. Again, just kicking it off, looking at the data, unlocking some data, and I think we're gonna start to make some pretty good progress against that over the coming 12 months. And then just simply force management. On business process improvement and automation, that's just taking the data our headquarters has now. It's applying industry standards, it's applying financial standards, and it's looking at our own data, automating where we can, and being able to better draw conclusions as we start moving funds, letting contracts, and understanding the implications. Turning to how we're actually gonna do this quickly, what it really comes from is a digital data mission management team. That's what we're building at USSOCOM headquarters. This is where we'll be able to programmatically begin applying and advocating for policies and the technologies that are currently exist, but we need to infuse inside our own workflows in the headquarters. We are creating what we call the soft data and digital services element. This is where the pros that we're bringing in will be able to either program manage or do the work themselves to help us solve our own problems, and when required, turn to the data engineering element in the lab that we're building in Ybor that's going to allow us to have a place off campus for unclassified and classified work where we can bring partners in conjunction with SOFWorks and begin speeding up the execution of contracts associated with needs that emerge from the field. And the last is really when I talk about executing contracts. What we've identified is a need to build a certain level of data and digital expertise inside SOF AT&L. And so in partnering with Jim Smith and his team, what we've done is we've taken several billets. We are gonna partner with Jim, and we've already executed, I think, a couple of those now, to actually bring data and digitally minded people into his formation, that when we have a need, we can prioritize that work, and also set some pieces in place that allow his PEOs to come and make sure as they're advancing requirements and improving systems, can talk about it from an engineering perspective to ensure that everything we're bringing in now works together and isn't a closed old block technology. How this is gonna work, we're gonna get a task from the field. We're going to consider time, expense, and complexity. And as we consider that, we'll make the basic determination of whether this is something we believe is a light enough engineering lift that we can solve it ourselves with our in-house residents, or do we need to focus our time and attention in preparing our data so that as we prepare that data, we can turn to that digital procurement for deployment cell, partner with industry, right? Soft data, soft compute, industry, intellectual property, and we can begin to set up what that licensing agreement for the current persistent application and renewal of that technology. Talked about a soft data engineering lab. Some of what I talk about often is fairly ethereal. It's up in the sky. We're talking about data. What we are doing is in Tampa, building out part of the SOFWorks facility where we are going to begin amassing this talent and making it available for the rest of the SOF enterprise. But what we hope to do is actually demonstrate that it's not just the SOF enterprise, that we can partner with everybody out there where we already have locations. And you know, if you look at Tampa as where the SOF enterprise is going to plant its first flag, we can look to USSOCOM for opportunities in the research triangle. We can look to the National Capital Region with things that General Shanahan and the team are already building there. With the JAKE, with Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, standing up Project Maven's Data Engineering Lab. In Boston, the Air Force has Kessel Run. In Pittsburgh, the Army AI Task Force is there. Austin, obviously, the Army Futures Command. What we've determined is we don't need to be everywhere. What we need to make sure is that we're connecting everywhere. And so that if we have a special talent, we have a special capability, we have an individual who has a need for something, we can canvas that entire ecosystem and not try and all buy that same boutique data scientist, developer, or engineer. So if we can uncover this, we can stitch SOF into the rest of the enterprise that exists, we think the compounding power will be pretty significant. The thing that keeps me up at night, and I put a quote there from a friend of SOF, Josh Wolf, as a venture capitalist up in Manhattan. It's that you know, failure is a failure to imagine failure. The modern AI ML workforce is really where I worry about the delivery and sustainment of some of these initiatives. If you talk about when you want to build a foundation, when you want to build a house, I view our uniformed SOF professionals as that build. But building a house takes time, it takes developing the plan, and it's a decade-long process, right? So the Army ORSAs have given us a good basis to build from, but we need to expand that down to our junior ranks, and we need to talk about how we make this a career opportunity to continue developing what really amounts to almost a language-type skill. So you can start out just having read the country handbook, and as you show prowess, we can develop you, put a marker on you, and allow you to go be a 5+, 5+ Python coder. But we need to let the nerds get promoted, right? Like that's an important component of this. And so we need to show that there's a benefit to this, that there's a financial benefit to it, something along those lines so we can start to grow this force. Again, interested in hearing from General Fogarty on the similarity to the cyber force we're trying to build with this similar skill set, but somewhat different. In the absence of having enough uniforms to get this moving, we buy it. But as we buy it as government civilians, it takes a long time to onboard people, and the reality is we have retention issues because it takes so long to bring them on, and then the pay compared to their industry partners with similar skill is extremely challenging to match. Now, we do have good Americans who are willing to come step in and do this for a while. But if we don't have the compute, if we don't have the data, and we don't maintain the hard challenges, they're not going to stay around long, so we'll get an initial surge, and then we won't be able to hold those people in the formation. So what we've done is we've contracted this out. Contracting, we love our contracting teammates, but it's an imperfect fit. We're buying a capability that never matches up one for what we need and doesn't allow us to truly invest in the people and begin building that out. Now, what I'll tell you is the rest of that space is really where we view industry has a huge opportunity to partner with us. We've got that licensed IP, that partnership, where as we come up with good ideas, as we see opportunities for data analytics and the application of data-driven technologies, we can turn to industry. As we rebalance the force, what we believe is we're going to have more opportunities to partner because we'll have more uniformed service members, we'll have more government civilians who can truly recognize an opportunity and then turn through the system and Jim Smith's team to really begin bringing that additional technology from you all in. In closing, before we bring the panel up, and we'll kick that off, yesterday I actually added this to my presentation, sir. And it really struck me. It's about 5 blocks north of here. I was trying to get to my car in the traffic for SOFIC. Everybody's been complaining about the traffic for SOFIC, by the way, throughout the Tampa industry. They love the mission, but it's struggling. What we've got is a placard that the great 1909 auto race began in Tampa. And what that was a group of guys from the Tampa Times. I did some research on it last night. Apparently there was a lot of whiskey and scotch involved, so they're probably going to be good SOFIC operators. But the reality is they determined that they wanted to do a race, that they had these automobiles, and they could take those automobiles and race them to Jacksonville. What they realized was they bogged down in swamps, they broke down, they didn't have the mechanics they needed, they didn't know the rules of the race, and it became a pretty interesting show that had people limping into Jacksonville a week after they thought they'd get there in the first place. But what they're credited for is now establishing the first need for an actual highway system in Florida. When you talk about applied AI and you talk about where we are in this journey, I think we're probably just leaving for Jacksonville. But what's going to emerge as we start applying the technology and we start thinking about how this is going to be in the future, we'll understand the roads we need to build, we'll understand the rules, the speed limits, the fact that we might need a traffic light, and we'll be able to start putting those in place programmatically and building them into the formation. So with that, sir, with your permission, I was going to go ahead and just bring the panelists up. If you guys would come on stage, and we'll start to kick this off through a series of dialogues. We'll save all the questions for the end. We'll do about 30 minutes with the panelists, and then we'll go into that back and forth. Thank you. So, first and foremost, I wanted to thank everybody for coming today. As I say on the slide, the SOF formation is a microcosm of the joint force. It makes it a great opportunity for us to hopefully be a living laboratory for the application of automation, data-driven technologies. I think we have a pretty good representation of the joint force. I'm going to go ahead and cover down for the Marines. We've got ASD West, who can also come up on stage if he wants to, and we can formally have you there, sir. But we're going to go ahead and kick off with General Fogarty. I've known General Fogarty for a long time, served in Afghanistan together. If you could kick us off and talk a little about automation in cyber. If AI is truly driven by the cloud, what are the implications on the cyber front with what some people see as a scary technology? And then, obviously, with the Joint MESO Web Ops Center mission coming to SOCOM, and that being a component of Army Cyber's future, how you view AI, ML, and data associated with getting that at the speed of need.
Okay, excellent. Hey, so first of all, thanks, Dave, for the invitation. I think the Army contributes the largest force to SOF. SOF is actually one of our largest customers at Army Cyber Command. And if I look at where we have our people, which is our most important resource, is talent. Our most talented operators are actually directly aligned or actually directly serving with SOF forces globally. And then we focus regionally. All the service cyber components and the regions that I'm responsible for are pretty busy for you as well as us. So it's a pretty natural link up. To set a little context, you talked about the 1909 race, and I think that's important because when you look at CyberCom and Army Cyber, we're less than 10 years old. You guys are getting ready to celebrate your 40th anniversary, and you look at your maturation over that 40-year period, and you're still pretty young compared to the other services who've been operating on land and sea for a couple thousand years. And so, the Air Force has been around for about 100 years. We've been around about 10 years. And so that becomes one of our challenges, but it may also give us an advantage. And so we think we have a natural partnership with SOCOM and the efforts that you're pushing. We think one of the keys to success is partnership. So I think it's talent, number one. We find that, first of all, our branch is very, very small. It's about 3,000 across the Army, and this is across a very large Army. And we made it small intentionally, and we focused on specific work roles instead of broad categories. And then we're very dependent upon enabling capabilities from the intel community, from the signal community, from a whole range of other capabilities. And I think that was probably the right decision, because instead of trying to boil the ocean, we focused on a pretty finite problem, and I think that's allowed us to move fairly quickly. I think AI, Dave, I think the analogy you gave and getting it started is very important. And we've got to be careful, I think, as a community about developing solutions in search of problems instead of having this thing driven by hard problems. Because what we're finding is, even with Maven, is that was a very difficult problem. There was a lot of focus on solving that, and then there's a lot of spin-offs that come off of that. And that's what we're finding on the cyber side. For Army Cyber, my mission is to integrate and conduct cyberspace operations, electronic warfare operations, and information operations. And I do that so that I can provide our commanders decision advantage, which will create freedom of action in both the information environment and in the cyber domain. And sometimes we get real focused on cyber. We're at a point now where I think when we move our headquarters down to Fort Gordon, Georgia next year, we're going to rebrand ourselves. Instead of Army Cyber Command, it's going to be Army Information Warfare Operations Command. And we think that is important, because when we look at those three components that I'm responsible for, we look at what the lessons learned are in the environment. We think it is really information warfare, not just a small cyber segment. Now, the reason I'm going into that, and I'll get to the point, is within my three buckets, cyber, IO, and EW, we think there are huge advantages to machine learning and AI technology. So if you look on the cyber side, 90% of my effort currently is operate and defend. About 10% is offense, and I want to flip that. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is automate processes that take us an incredible amount of manpower. So that high-end talent, we apply it against, I think, problems that are fairly simple. And when I look at the volume, the variety, the velocity of the adversary's attacks against our networks, which I think is the most important operation, most important capability that the U.S. has, is what allows all that data to move back and forth. We've got to get to a point where we can move much faster than the adversary. So everyone hears and talks about the EDA Loop. We cast it a little differently. So for us, and this is the big idea that I'll leave here on the table. Maybe it's not that big, but it's for us what we're kind of organizing around. It's this idea that whoever can sense, understand, decide, and act faster than the adversary, they enjoy decisive advantage. And that is in every operational domain. So in cyberspace, I think it's even more so. And so that's driving our requirement for AI, machine learning, automated processes that aren't even quite machine learning or AI, to both defend the network at speed and at scale, and then be able to flip that just as rapidly and be able to attack the adversary. In the IO sphere, when you look at the volume of data that is being projected, first of all, counter IO has got to be a core task for all of us. And again, part of that's cultural understanding. Part of that is to be able to translate real-time video, voice, text, be able to analyze and aggregate very, very rapidly. And so if you look at the efforts that CENTCOM's pioneered with web ops, I look at that and go, that's really impressive. Probably in many, many years ago, because what they struggle with, what we're going to struggle with across the department, is to be able to scale this globally in real time, where adversaries, they're not playing by the same constraints that we are. So again, that gives them that advantage, that decisive advantage of speed, as we're going through this very process-driven sequence that I think actually crushes us. And then on electronic warfare, for us, it's the ability to sense the spectrum, be able to understand very, very rapidly. And I think where we got to get, particularly in EW, is autonomous capabilities. And then the last thing, and I'll close with, for us, the considerations. Everything I described, I think, is technically feasible. We make tremendous progress. We watch what the commercial side does on a routine basis, and they understand speed is absolutely essential. Precision is also, but speed is what we think is most important. We got to make sure we don't drag ourselves down with cultural baggage, with policies, authorities, processes that we love. And I tell people, I said, when November 8th, 2016, we were in the CyberCom JOC, and the election was going on in the background that night. No one cared. We were focused on conducting what was the biggest offensive cyberspace operation that the United States had conducted to date. We were doing it in conjunction with some of our partners. And so at the end of that night, we were kind of fist bumping and giving each other high fives. And what we didn't realize at that time is that that was also a culmination point for a nation-state adversary that had culminated a 2-year campaign directly attacking the United States and the homeland. And we didn't have the understanding. There was nothing to decide, and we certainly weren't acting. We can never find ourselves in that space again. And General Alexander used to talk about the cyber Pearl Harbor. He used to catch a lot of criticism for that. I think that's what happened that night, and it took us a long time to realize. So when we distill all that down, Dave, I think that for us, AI and ML is absolutely critical to give us that decisive advantage of speed and precision.
Right, thank you, sir. I really appreciate that breakdown. And you said some things that I think resonate across the panel here. One of the things I was going to do was actually turn to Mike McGuire, Colonel McGuire on the end. I know you spoke of the OODA loop. Mike and I have recently talked about blowing up the OODA loop, and I think that we have opportunities with where we're at. So Mike, if you could briefly touch on your thoughts on that, how data is an essential part of that, and then just kind of give us a quick rundown on your thoughts on actually getting this talent to the edge, the advantage of that in the data-driven world, and what you think a CONUS-based support element could look like.
All right, sir, I'd be happy to. So maybe being a little bit provocative, sir, but I think the OODA loop is dead, I think is my argument. And
I agree.
If you look at artificial intelligence, at our peer adversaries that we're facing, I think we're not going to win the supply chain. We're not going to win the access to training data. Algorithms are public domain. It's a toss-up. So I think the idea that we're going to win by having more information is something we can't count on. So I think the alternative is to act faster. So instead of observing, orienting, going through that process, I think what we need to be able to do is predict and then act. So that gives the opportunity to act with incomplete information and act sooner. It comes with it the downside that you might be wrong. And I think if you look at what it takes we have to accept a little bit of risk to act sooner in order to gain initiative. So when we look at things at the tactical level, how can we predict and then act, accept and mitigate those risks that come with acting early? Because I don't think we're ever going to win if we all wait for perfect information. So with that, the idea of predicting and acting, the principle, at least at the tactical level that we're working towards, and I think it probably scales if you look at operational and strategic, is start at the end, which is an action, right? We want to get the right information to the right person at the right time and in the right format that they can actually take some kind of action. So if you start with the end state being the end user, whether he's an analyst or an operator in the door or whatever, and work your way back, that's the overall goal. So data isn't necessarily the coin of the realm. I think usable information is the coin of the realm. So sometimes we've looked at how much data we can bring in and we haven't given enough thought to the quality of that data. Is this next bit of data giving us additional information, or is it duplicative? So right info, right person, right time, right format so that they can act on it. So if you look at that, sort of get to your other question, so how do you structure that? How much of that can sit in an office in Virginia? How much is it Fort Bragg? How much is it some forward fob? And how much is actually maybe on the target, to use a tactical example? I think the workforce needs to match the workplace, right? So what we definitely need forward are things like information transport and storage architecture. You go into a new AO, the first thing you need to do is get the plumbing right or get the foundation right in your house example. So when we go forward, it is the data transport and storage architect. Number two, it's the data ingestion, data conditioning, and data structuring. So you get into a new area of operations, you've got a lot of data feeds from different sensors, maybe from national, other things. The big problem, as you saw in the Amazon principles up there, get the APIs right, get it so you can ingest that info. So that has to happen forward. The third thing is the operator first visualization needs to be forward, needs to be where the operator is. Great data, great conclusions, but if it's not in a format that an operator, again, whether that's a pilot or an analyst or a mechanic, it's got to be in a format that he can take it in. That has to happen forward. And the last thing that has to happen forward as much as possible based on the evolution of compute is inference, the ability to make decisions or make recommendations at the edge. So those things have to happen forward. What that means can be back in the rear, I think, are things like algorithm development, model optimization, model tuning, and the large-scale training. It can happen in the cloud. It can happen in an office in Virginia. So if we look at what goes forward with us and what stays back with us, I think that's kind of how you line it up. So the things that go forward have to see the problem through the end user's eyes. They have to understand the why and see the adjacent opportunities. And it can't be overlooked. They have to be there. So whatever you need to act, information's going to come in batches. It's the schedule forward doesn't match the schedule back home. There is a magic about having that guy who can solve the problem algorithmically sitting next to the guy who needs the answer 24/7, and we can't overlook that. So I think there's a split. To give you a quick example on some of the things that we're looking at right now, we're trying it for one of our mission sets. We tried a unique model for intelligence, and what evolved out of it, instead of would have been a whole bunch of analysts, about 1/3 of that team is Intel analysts, and about 2/3 of them are, I would say, kind of technical experts. The interesting thing about it is there's not a lot of data scientists in there. The algorithms that are needed are, you can pull them off GitHub. They're not world-class problems. But the bulk of that, 2/3 of that element is data architecture. It is data kind of cleaning and conditioning, and it is writing the apps that allow guys to visualize it. So I think as we look forward, those are the things that are critical to be right next to the end user. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I'd like to pivot from you straight to Brett, if we could. Brett is the new director of the Defense Digital Service. It's still a fairly new office, I guess. You're round number 2. As you begin to think about the Defense Digital Service, how it's looking at data and where you plan to take that, recognizing that applied AI and ML exist in the real world, but they exist because of data analytics and data engineering to support the application of those technologies. Could you just kind of tell us broadly, as an OSD leader now, where you see the department and how SOF fits into helping facilitate that change?
So, thank you.
In human language.
In human, all right. So we're going to scratch these notes. So I'm on week 4 of the job. Thanks for having me, and thanks for showing me Tampa. So when I was being recruited, I spoke to the acting SecDef, and he had a real focus on not just the traditional, let's have data-driven decision-making, but let's actually do it for real. Let's embrace big data, let's embrace AI, and also embrace analytics. So when I look at DDS, and so the Defense Digital Service, what are we? I report directly to SecDef. I have a SWAT team of nerds. And our job is, throughout the enterprise, where can we provide high impact, solve hard problems? We go where the work is. I've been to Afghanistan, which is something in my private sector life I never thought I'd do. And we try and assist our active duty friends to solve the hard problems in sustainable ways. Now, historically, DDS has not been in the data science game. Now, I happen to be a computer scientist who is also a data scientist. So this is part of our new game. So we've taken these marching orders. Now, how do I think about this? And it's consistent with the acting SecDef's mission here. We need to do it right. So we need to not just talk a big game in the space and have what I would call shiny one-hit wonders and do that, but think about, you know, going back to what Mike and Dave have talked about, we have enormous amounts of data, but how do we actually turn that into information, and how do we do that in a sustainable way? So when you think about that, because we're all going to use a house example today, we need to build a solid foundation. And what does that mean? That's the non-sexy part of data science. How do we bring our data together? How do we have schema? How do we accept the fact that we're all not as uniquely special as we think we are, and start to have more of a unified, standardized platform? And then we take this concept of, oh, we've brought our data together, which is a hard work. We understand our assets, put it into a platform, and then insert my APIs and start to be able to ask some hard problems there. So what do we need to do? One, we need to start getting architecture right. We need to have reusable platforms that throughout the DoD can be used and not necessarily customized. We need to start to share those assets. But then two, we need to start to share techniques. Now, something you'll see me advocate is not just ability to execute, but ability to understand. So earlier you brought up the example of the Marines in email. Like right now, Dave, if you send an email, the odds are it's going to go through it, and you don't have to think about how that works. But if instead we run a deep learning neural network, we need to understand what it is doing. And we can't, at this point in a nascent implementation, have that sort of blind faith. So at this point, the vision is going to be strong foundation, start to build knowledge, and like people like Steve have been amazing partners in sort of how do we train our amazing folks to do these things. But we need to be thoughtful about how we teach them new methods, make sure we're always thinking about the field and the edge and never sitting in the lab, and then say, what are our lessons learned? How can they be reused? Now, where SOF is great is it's a wonderful place to try new things for critical real cases. What I care about is bringing the best in technology to the real world, because I don't want to build things in a lab that don't have direct impact. So this can be a partnership where it's forward-leaning, develop these new platforms, bring the new techniques, but always be thinking reuse, always be thinking education, lessons learned, and then build around it.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that, Brett. The partnership with DDS, frankly, has been critical to us, even getting the last 10 months under our belt. You just, frankly, loaned us people. Just take these 15s, we'll pay their TDY, let them help you. And so every application of that, I think you're actually living that support mechanism for SOF, so we appreciate you and your team. Margie, turning to you now. You know, we got to know each other on some hiring boards. There was a U.S. Navy SOCOM warfighter talk. One of the do-outs was get Margie with Dave. So we accomplished that quickly as a task from the SOCOM commander and the CNO. Since then, we've started to partner on some things, leveraging NSW, looking what NSW is doing and the impact for big Navy. Where are you at in standing up the digital warfare office for the Navy? How are you beginning to think about data engineering and what is arguably, once you take all the data and create something that we'd call a training quality data set, and I'm going to come to Murf next on that, you know, how you broker that and how do we partner going forward with your efforts?
Yeah, sure. So as Dave said, I'm the director of the Navy Digital Warfare Office, and we've been running only about 2 years, which I know is a lot longer than you have in digital terms. But our mission is really to improve the Navy's ability to have decision advantage and lethality by integrating data in systems. And in the Navy, we tend to have a pretty system-focused mindset in terms of how we build future capabilities, and we want to turn that into a data-focused mindset. A lot of times we think about systems of systems, but the data piece can ride above that level. And as you said, kind of pulling together those different data sets is not as easy as you'd think. We tend to go after, individual programs that have their own sets of data. And so when we really get to the decision maker, the challenge is to how to abstract the data from those individual systems and pull it together. One of the things I like about our partnership is that the SOF community is very user-centric, human-focused, when you think about how you design. And you put your decision maker at the center of your design process. And I think we're really interested in doing that in the Navy around our sailors. So one of the things we've done in the Digital Warfare Office is try to find those sailors out there that have the combination of operational expertise and technical expertise, and put them in a place where they can actually start to solve problems that they've seen in the field. And we've got a couple projects running in that area. But data is the long pole in the tent, and it is something where I feel like we've got to get our house in order on the government side to be able to get those schemas that Brett talked about and figure out how we're going to pull this together, and then open up that environment with those training data sets to industry, to our own sailors, and find where that creativity is going to be, and give them the tools in a common dev environment in order to be able to show us what they think they can do with it. I think the partnership with the SOF community is really interesting because of that human-centered focus piece and understanding, how do you go about this a little bit more rapid than we're used to in our traditional acquisition processes. I think there's a lot to learn for the big service from the SOF community from that perspective.
Awesome, thank you. And again, thanks for the openness to let us go in and start leveraging NSW and Big Navy to kind of create that experimental environment. We hope to find a way to open a data engineering lab on the West Coast maybe, and continue building that ecosystem in partnership with you. As we talk about data and we talk about training quality data and we talk about Navy data, that's where I turn to my good friend Murf, who you've kind of been doing big data analytics and engineering before it became cool for the Air Force and your R&D element. Could you talk to us a little bit about your experience now in the real world, creating training quality data sets that will facilitate labeling? I recently read an article that creating training quality data and human labeling is the sharecropping of the 21st century. Could you just expand upon what you've been doing for the AWCFT and General Shanahan and the team, and where you think that future's going?
That better? Just to echo Steve's thanks to General Clark. Thank you for the opportunity to come and talk. And Dave, you're doing, SOF couldn't be a better place to get this going. And so the work you guys are doing, I think, is really, really good. But that article resonated with me too. That was that Axion article, right? And sharecropper is a really good term. So General Shanahan was down maybe a month ago, and we started kind of our briefing off of, hey, we've been at this 703 days, sir. And we were optimistic at the beginning when we decided we're going to pick the easiest data set out there, FMV. Hey, we're going to clean it up a little bit, get it to algorithm developers, and we're going to do great things, right? And so we have a pretty good DevOps environment with, good engineers, good cloud people, good AI, good analysts. And we've been at that for quite a while. So General Shanahan, Drew Kukort asked us if we could take, a whack at the front end. And, probably a good just analogy of building off what Colonel McGuire said. I tend to agree with you. It's predict and act. But some great mathematician comes to you and says, hey, here's the math. I can guarantee you with a 95% accuracy that I can develop an algorithm to look at a high school football team, predict what play they're going to run. It's going to be a pass to the right, to the left, up the middle, get it to the defense, and 95% of the time we're going to be great. Great advantage, right? You're going to win a lot of football games that way. So that's kind of the going in when we're in Maven. That's what we're going to do, right? Well, the first data set that was going to do that, you'll remember this, right, it's great. We got 40 terabytes. It's all good. All we got to do is clean it up a little bit and put it out. Well, not so fast, right? The data set really turned out to be no good at all. It wasn't even the right years, right? And this is one of the first things you find out about data. I think we've gotten, I don't know, I couldn't tell you, maybe 70, 80, 100 terabytes of data now. None of it that we've gotten so far was actually what the provider thought it was, right? So data's dirty, and that's the first lesson we learned. But you say, okay, well, to do that algorithm, I need 5 years of football data, right? So games from 5 years, if you can give me that, I can guarantee 95% accuracy. So what we did is we thought we were getting the data, and it turned out to be 8mm data, and I think you remember this, right? So it's like, oh, what do we do now? And it's like, well, let's reach out to some of the units, kind of like you go talk to the boosters. Hey, is there anybody in the booster club that actually has some good 4K data that we could use on this? And those of you who have kids and play sports, there's always one guy, right? And it's Mr. Wilson, right? He's at every game, and he's got the latest iPad on a tripod, and he tapes the whole game, and everything comes out perfect, right? So that's what we did. You remember the first data provider, right? But the problem is, Mr. Wilson sends you his computer, and you open it up, and he's not a very good knowledge manager, right? He's got all that data on there, but there's also, all the kids, dance rehearsal from 22 years ago. The kids play video games on it, so there's all this malware on it. And this is what we've been through almost every time, right? So now you got to start, okay, well, how do I just get the football games off of there? And to Brett's point, that's just like hard sharecropping work. So it turned out to be way, way harder than we thought. And then, you finally get 5 years of football game data. Good, okay, we can send these the algorithm developers. Not so quick. Every image that has a scoreboard on it, we got to take that out because that's classified. Ooh, how are we going to do that, right? So now you got to come up with a method to do that. And then they come back and said, well, you actually have to label the data, right? So every image, guard, tackle, center, halfback, and you got to do this for 5 years worth of data, right? So that's what we're really finding out on the train quality data. If you talk to Drew Kuchort, we kind of all went in with the idea that you'd spend maybe 10, 15% of your time on preparing the data, and then all the rest of the time be on algorithm deployment. It's completely the reverse of what we found out. Probably 3/4 of the time is going from getting the data to actually getting it to the algorithm developer. And so Sharecropper, when I read that article, really resonated with me. And that's been our experience today. But you learn a lot in the process.
You do. And I think that's again, the return on investment sometimes is in learning what else is in your data that you can take advantage of, regardless of the algorithm that you're trying to get after. Turning to Admiral Hendrickson, with your background as one of the founding members of DIU, and now your position at U.S. Southern Command, could you almost take us on a little bit of a walk in your experience One, in how we're taking some of these advanced technologies and working them into the system, but more importantly, what we've been talking about for I guess over about a year and a half now, off and on, is the culture and workflow changes that also are required, and we find opportunity in when you start leveraging data to advance your processes.
Sure. First of all, thank you for inviting me. As I was kind of reading through the bios of everyone here, I was wondering what my role was supposed to be.
Sir, we needed a seal on stage.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And I think my role is that I'm the representative of, as a geographic combatant command right now, we consume capabilities. We own operational problems. We apply capabilities we're given to those problems. We try and balance the risk as best we can. And then additionally to that, because the particular geographic combatant command I belong to is one of the less resourced in DoD, we actually don't have we don't have, a lot of gray hulls and a lot of military tail numbers to kind of rely on, and so we have to think about things a little bit differently. So going back to your question about DIU, I think I would classify my experience in the Valley with DIU as an episode of Scared Straight. I came back and I realized there were things going on in areas I had no idea, and the speed with which it was proceeding not only challenged my bachelor of my English degree, but it also, I thought, was challenging to my whole notion of kind of how we do resourcing and capability development in the department. Had a brief tour at Naval Special Warfare, and then down to Southcom to work for Admiral Tidd, and I ran right up against kind of what I think all of us, it's unique, right, is that a lot of the folks here on this panel are dealing with and struggling, I'd say, with kind of the integration of these technologies, and yet they're focused on those areas. I'm at a command where we're not, we're focused on operational problems, and you really have to kind of get people's attention on how to do, the notion of doing things differently. When the notion of difference equals risk to most people, and therefore you've really got to figure out innovative ways to get people's attention or ways to prove that certain things can work. And so I'd say that, for us, there's a question of where do you park these kinds of efforts? We certainly, how do you sponsor them? We had Admiral Tidd's sponsorship. We ended up creating a new directorate focused on countering threat networks, and I was fortunate to be selected to lead that. And we put a lot of the efforts into that, and really, I think what I found was, and the team, there was a blend of ops, intel, and law enforcement. And a lot of the particular problems we went at, we realized we didn't have the data. As DoD, we really didn't have the authorities. And so what was necessary was to figure out some way to scale the number of analysts we had using different tactics, techniques, and procedures, different sources of data, and then to be able to present those findings in a way that was absorbable by our leadership and by the interagency. Because I think the first notion of if you want to take unified action, you have to have unified understanding. Because the essential piece there is that the military doesn't own the authorities to actually do the end game in this case. Even if we're very constrained in a lot of the authorities going after these threat networks. So what you want to do is you want to arbitrage the authorities that are available to you, which means you have to present a consumable picture to the interagency group there that own the authorities and have a constructive discussion about what's appropriate to use. In all of that, what we realized was we had success and continue to have success on the margins. What's very difficult is scaling to the scope of the problem. And I think a lot of it has to do with the things here. It is if you think it's hard to get people's attention about AI and ML, or even any other, like the sensor technologies that we're using, you start talking to them about data strategy and scrubbing through and all the infrastructure that has to be in place to actually get to scale, and you've completely lost them. Then they start to wonder if there's Velcro on the back of your Trident, and you are actually a soft guy or you're someone who's posing. But I think to me that's been the hardest challenge there, is to get the attention on folks. I know that the Defense Innovation Board, one of their recommendations, they presented 15 of them, and one of them was about providing major military commands with DevOps teams. And that's and I did have a discussion with Chris, initially about how we might get a team in there, because really if you can start with a core, you've got a chance. But I think we've got that. I wonder about our ability to sustain it when we only consume capabilities. We're never quite sure what kind of talent we're going to get it, detailed in. And we can only go for, very exquisite talent on a case-by-case basis, and it's often non-repeatable. So I guess that's my role, is to talk about kind of the Mark I motto, what is the joint force, dealing with when we're trying to absorb these things.
Yeah, no, thanks. Part of your point there was how do you translate it beyond just an algorithm or a simple purchase of a software application to recognize what Murf talked about, which is a lesson learned from Maven is 70% of our investment needs to be on the data up front, and the other stuff almost turns out to be pretty easy, to Mike and Brett's point, once you get that nailed. I will say that hopefully we at SOCOM are turning that corner a little bit. General Fogarty with General Petraeus, back when I used to work for him, sir, used to coin a phrase, in their own words. We used to talk about the enemy, and we would literally open our briefs with in their own words. General Clark yesterday, or 2 days ago, in his opening statement, I think used the words natural language processing, data analytics, sentiment analysis, and data science apps with microservices. So I think if our senior-most leaders are turning that corner and starting to use those very specific terms in ways that we can begin to operationalize, that they're lead turning us again and showing us what that future is. General Linder, Major General Linder, the SOCOM Chief of Staff, even took the Data Science for Executives course from Johns Hopkins University via Coursera, and really established that this is the direction SOCOM's going. This is our future. He had a cackle when he pointed at everybody after he finished and said, "Now I'm smarter than all of you too." But the reality is, I think across echelons, our senior leaders are starting to make the turn. Our junior officers and enlisted have more of this capability and understanding than we realize, and we need to start opening our workflows and our processes and allowing them to transform us from the ground up, whether it's forward, Mike, or whether it's on a boat to ship to Margie. Sir, we're going to turn to question and answer via Slido. I just wanted to know if you, after listening to anything, had any follow-up points you wanted to make, sir.
The only thing I would say is that if you go back to General McChrystal, speed of trust, that's applicable, it's critical in this space. When we started conducting offensive cyberspace operations, everyone was concerned we're going to break the internet. And so what ends up happening is we've gotten into this do loop of, well, if you do this, these are the things that could happen. And we've tried to flip that to say, if you don't do this, these are the things that will certainly happen, and they're all bad to us. And so we have to be able to take a risk, getting back to Mike's point. So that sense, understand, decide, and act, there's a risk calculus, right? And sometimes in order to act faster than the adversary, that's why we used to talk about speed and precision. I think speed is more important. There's an appropriate level of precision. But we don't have days to put an ISR soak on something in social media because you lose that window very, very rapidly. And so we're going to have to push this down to an area where people are going to make mistakes. And guess what happens? Today there were probably 10,000, 10 million things that were posted on the internet that were not true. And you know what? And tomorrow there'll be 10 million things that will not be true. And the next day there'll be 10 million things that aren't true. And so these are not nuclear weapons if we make a mistake. But I think we're at a point now where, because we're afraid of making mistakes, we have ceded the environment to the adversary, and they are running wild with that advantage. So we support the commanders, but we've got to stop falling in love with process, and we've got to start acting and at an acceptable level of risk. And we can tune this at an appropriate level. Sure. And that's all I'll say, Dave.
All right,
Thanks.
sir, thank you. We've got about 9.5 minutes, so we ate a lot of clock here, and we're going to go rapid fire on some questions that are coming in from the audience. I'll take the first question. It says, how do we overcome industry and generational moral objections to aiding in the development of AI/ML autonomy for military applications? I would say I think that's actually a falsehood. I don't think we have industry and generational moral objections to aid in this development. I think that we've had some pretty sensational news stories. I think we have near-peer adversaries who probably want to create more of that disconnect than actually exists. But I think the fact that we have a full audience today, that we have an entire conference upstairs that's packed, and that we are delivering these technologies to the formation almost illuminates that although there might be some pockets of people who are very vocal, that we actually have overcome that because there's just red-blooded Americans who want to help our men and women be more precise and come home safely. So I'll take on that one. The next one, really, it's what is DoD's biggest challenge in adopting AI? If I could start with Margie, and then almost go rapid fire through everybody in 60 seconds or less, what is your thought on that one? What is our biggest challenge, Margie?
I think it's got to be managing the talent. I think about all the technology pieces associated with it, the challenge with data, the challenge with integrated systems, understanding all these pieces, but they all come down to the talent. And when I look across our microcosm in the Navy of who is going to do this for us, I see really talented people, but I don't necessarily see the mechanism to employ them effectively in jobs that are directly related to AI development, and then how to actually sustain that growth path and continue with the attract, recruit, retain pieces that are necessary within our systemic systems. We tend to not necessarily value this. We haven't put a marker on it yet, and I think there's absolutely mechanisms we have to do that, but it's going to take the department, I think, to turn and value it much more than they do today.
Awesome. Brett.
Architecture. It's like, that's an excellent point. We need to grow talent, and we need to also understand that similar to the cyber example that Steve brought up, we can actually teach our folks we have enormous talent, and you don't need to be a grad school computer scientist to do this, but we need to increase that. But more important than that, as I noted before, we need to move away from these bespoke architectures because we have more data than most, and if we don't solve that problem, we're just going to, again, fall into these, single hit products.
Mike?
I think it's talent, but it's not the exquisite talent. So every operator in SOF knows how to put on a tourniquet and treat hypothermia. Everybody in SOF needs to have some level of understanding of how data can be useful to them, and it doesn't take a force full of PhDs. It just takes everybody to have a little bit of understanding. Quickly, I remember 15 years ago, we had a decision point, at least in our organization, where you could either hire some company to build a SQL database for you, or you could teach your people to do SQL databasing and own it forever. we still have a bunch of people sitting in our basement that do SQL databasing because we didn't commit to making it part of our DNA 15 years ago. I think we need to make it part of our DNA just a little bit across the force instead of a few geniuses here and there.
Okay, well, not lost on me that you say it doesn't take a bunch of PhDs, but I'm talking to a PhD on the end of the row here, so.
And I'm contributing nothing to it.
I got you, I got
I'm the tourniquet guy.
Brian.
So I agree with talent, but I often talk about kind of culture as the challenge. I think it really boils down to incentives. And specifically, if you've spent your, we in DoD, we don't get paid to be efficient. We do get paid to be effective. And if that effectiveness is doing things the way you know how to do them, i.e. the Mandralic solution, throwing more people at a problem and more spreadsheets at a problem that are derivative of some other data, then mission accomplished. And there are a lot of incentives, because this is what we've grown up with, and it's I think, it's always comforting to have at the leadership levels people starting to understand what needs to happen, but there's a incentive structure in the middle that is particularly challenging, I think, and so I think really taking a close look at incentives is a way we get after this.
I agree. Murf.
I would say speed and sense of urgency, kind of echoing what General Fogarty said. We really like process in DoD, and I think Amir Hussein had a story. I think he was out here and talked to you guys a little bit earlier over at SOCOM. He's one of the CEOs out in Austin company. He got invited over to NATO and was giving a presentation on AI and where it's going, and the undersecretary called him in and said, "Hey, we really want you to bid, and we need that in NATO." And he said, I can't help you, sir. And he said, "Why not?" And he said, "Well, I sat in one of your earlier meetings, and you're talking about bringing that into fruition." I think it was 2023 or something. He said, I forgot what it was, that's 12 generations of AI right now. Every 6 months, there's a new generation of AI. So I think DoD's got to figure out how to keep pace with that. I think that's really important.
All right, thank you. And I think General Fogarty, if you want the walk-off here, and we'll hit our mark.
I think it's our cultural propensity to apply resources instead of applying thought. And we could spend a lot of money and end up with nothing at the end of it, or end up with not what we need. So I think there's a governor, so we want to move with speed and agility, but I think the path, Dave, that you laid out, it's very logical. It's not deliberate, meaning slow, but you're not trying to do all of this on your own. You understand the importance of leveraging partners, seeing what everyone else is doing, not making those same mistakes, and then applying against your problems instead of trying to boil the ocean. So, good on you.
Thanks, sir. General Clark, with your permission, I think we've hit our time hack here. I want to thank everybody. I know you guys flew in just for this, so we appreciate your time. You have a coveted SOCOM Yeti, because you can't be an organization if you don't have your own branded Yetis. Next to your chairs there, hopefully you guys take those away and know that we appreciated the time you gave us today. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to close this out real quick. Seeing this was our last event, I would say that USSOCOM is in great stead here in this very complicated area with Dave Spirk at the lead. Exhibit hall is open till 1:30, networking break also ongoing. Thanks to General Rich Clark and Jim Smith great partners, SOCOM team and NDIA team. Everyone have a great Memorial Day weekend and find a way to honor those that have given the ultimate sacrifice. Thank you very much.